We are a magazine based out of the University of Oxford, and it's a collection of uh, young people who are pursuing their MPhil or their doctoral research. And we are trying to engage with statesmen and scholars across the world in order to make a better sense of what's going across the world. And I thank Dharani Dharan for arranging the interview. And yeah, so but thank you very much for being with OPR. Since you represent the DMK, the Dravid Munnetra Kazhagam party, which is one of the prominent party in Tamil Nadu. The interview would be based on some of the questions which are dealing with the politics, regional as well as the national politics, as well as your views on the state of the Indian economy. As uh, I see you have two roles in a broad spectrum. Like you represent a legacy. Your grandfather was in the Justice Party, then you have a legacy, and then you have been a banker, you have had a senior position at the Standard Chartered Bank Singapore. So starting with the state of since it's the coronavirus which is dominating the headlines there, and India definitely is badly affected, and thankfully the scores are low if the present data is to be believed. But what do you make out of the present preparedness, the decision to go with lockdown? Although you have been critical of the government's decision to enforce a lockdown, and you have been vocal in the print as well as the media, the electronic media. So, would you explain what exactly went wrong, or what could have been done in the present state of affairs?
Yeah, first of all, let me thank you for the opportunity. I've always considered myself a student. I say that every convocation and every college I get invited to. So even virtually, I'm always happy to be back amid students and kind of trying to apply my experience to the learning process. Second, I've written a lot, and just to clarify, it's not that I've been against the lockdown. It's that I have been against the lack of preparedness and the lack of empathy and compassion shown in the way the lockdown was implemented. So let me even elucidate further on that. In my state, for example, we already had a couple of disasters, nowhere near the consequences of what we have now. In 2015 in Chennai, we had unprecedented floods. We had like 100-year rain. And it led to some really bad management of the process, which led to release of water from a dam at an inopportune time with bad decision making and bad information flow. And it led to many deaths and significant economic devastation. So what had happened after that, like in other situations, the CAG, the Controller and Accountant General of India's office, had done an audit of this thing. And they had revealed that the state's disaster management committee had not met even once, not once, prior to the flood. That report was suppressed for a couple of years and was not released till 2018, late or maybe even early 19. But we've had series of disasters after that. We had a hurricane, Gaja, in my constituency of Madurai Central, the Madurai Meenakshi Amman Temple, a massive fire broke out and destroyed a 600-year-old structure. So these are all things that I have brought up in the assembly and said, dedicate more resources, do more planning, communicate kind of strategies of how people should react in different situations ahead of time, and get ready because, it's not as if they occur once in 100 years. We've seen in 4 or 5 years, we've seen this. So my first concern is that we were not prepared for this. My second concern is that both in Tamil Nadu and in India, political considerations overrode other considerations. So either they didn't pay attention to the scientific and kind of global indications, or forget that they didn't even listen to or watch Kerala and see what they were doing, or listened to our party's leader in the assembly for 2 weeks. We kept telling them, shut it down, shut it down. They didn't listen. And when they did choose to lock down, it was based on political considerations rather than other things. Like in Mr. Modi's case, they wanted to get the Madhya Pradesh government toppled and their man sworn in as chief minister, and they ordered closure immediately when they achieved that goal. In Tamil Nadu's case, the assembly was accelerated, and they did, the kind of imbecilic futility of passing demands for grants for 27 departments or something in one day, all of which are not worth the paper they're written on. You can imagine that every budget, every financial plan of everybody has gone out the window. Neither are you going to get anywhere near the receipts, nor can you prioritize what you thought you were going to prioritize prior to the crisis. So a complete exercise in futility ran till the 24th at 4 p.m. And then at 6 p.m., we went into lockdown. So it left millions of people stranded without adequate resources, without being able to reach home. We are a country of tens of millions of migrant workers. They were left. So it was the nature of the execution and the philosophy that drove the timing that I railed against, rather than whether or not we should have had a lockdown.
And taking this on a micro level, as you represent one constituency, the Madurai Central in Tamil Nadu, as a legislator, how have you responded to the crisis, and whether there is something which is we could say as something unique or something new you have experimented with in controlling? If there is something you can share
Yeah.
with us.
No. See, controlling is very hard, especially as a legislator, because we have multiple levels of government. We have the panchayat or corporation, then we have the state, then we have the center. We have in the middle district officials, and then we have who's in power, who's opposition. I'm an opposition MLA. But what I will say is that I saw this coming. So, in two ways, I was better prepared than most. The first is that I had built infrastructure down to the last mile,
Hmm.
because our political system is organized by electoral booths and people are assigned to booths. In my constituency, I have about 2.5 lakh voters, 250,000 voters, and at an average of about 1,000 voters a booth, I have about 240 or 239 booths. So I actually have two agents per booth that I have appointed in order to make sure that I am in touch with the constituents on a regular basis. And then the hierarchy goes up from there to the corporation ward and the division and so forth. So I have about, I don't know, 500 and odd office bearers. And all of them are connected to me electronically. Right from when I was a candidate, I set up a call center with like 12 parallel lines, a CRM, WhatsApp number for taking requests. I found that high tech worked only so far. So I set up complaint boxes, suggestion and complaint boxes, after doing kind of a GPS assessment in 27 places across my constituency, and have my own staff go and pick up those in need. So because I had this infrastructure early, I actually shut down all my offices on the 21st itself. After banging our head against the wall in the assembly, I said, this is just going to get worse from now. And I don't want to be a center of spread myself, because hundreds of people come to see me on a regular basis. So I
Yes.
shut down all my offices. I sent off all the staff. I also have an office as the head of the
Hmm.
IT wing for my party. We shut down those offices.
Hmm.
I shut down my party office, my MLA office, my personal office, made sure everybody was kind of capable of working from home on the 21st itself. And therefore, when the lockdown came, we were in much better shape to help people. So that was the first part. The second part is, because we have granular data of what happens at every booth, and who is there and what is their situation. I've already done kind of three things. The first is a helpline. Whoever is in desperate need calls me for whatever, from getting permission to get medical treatment or travel, or sometimes I get random requests. Somebody asked me to help deliver cat food to a orphanage where some cats were dying because they were not able to get cat food. So something esoteric like that. Of course, we have infrastructure better than most. The second is that I found about 10 or 15 of the poorest, weakest families in every booth. And so we, without gathering more than 5 or 8 people at one place, we packaged a set of provisions, rice and dal and things like that, dry goods, and we have it delivered. And the third that I am doing on my resources is that now we have found the weakest colonies, the whole areas, the daily wage workers, the Dhobi colony. There are certain parts, particularly there's still a strong correlation between caste and economic progress, even in Tamil Nadu today. So we find particular colonies, and this time we are planning to get 5,000 families supplied with some basic provisions to make sure they're okay. Now, the good ways of doing things like this is when in a party, I could have done this as an individual with my own organizational structure, but in a party is when you do this, then the party office bearers step up. So I take care of dry goods, the party office bearers take care of supplying fresh vegetables and fruits and stuff, which I cannot do logistically. But I had one last point I want to make on this. In a democracy like ours, one of the biggest dissonance is that most of us in power with access say, do as I say, not as I do. It's people like us are used to being in the photo opportunity mode, right? I go and open something, I attend a wedding, I do. So on an average day, I was attending 6 or 8 functions and meeting hundreds of people. So showing the discipline of staying home, of following quarantine, of following physical distancing was important to me. So I have actually refused to go out to take any photos. I go for essential things, but I don't let any images of that go out. Because I have the luxury of a good infrastructure and a good team, I'm executing, I would say, at least average, in my estimation, better than average of what data I get. But I have not left for any event myself. And I put out a voice message to my constituents, and I said, I am staying home because in our democracy, we need to show that people with power and money and access follow the same rules as the rest of you. If I am on the street every day taking photos of helping people, then I'm surely not in a position to tell you, don't come out, because my profession is to be out helping people. So if I practice mine, I can't tell you don't practice yours. So I've actually stayed 98+% lockdown.
Thank you so much for the elaborate answer. That takes us to some questions on the state of the Indian economy, which is definitely not pleasant given the past few months of performance and the present slowdown which is expected. Now, you have been a banker, and we know what's happened to the fantastic situation which we find our banks in. What is happening and what has happened to the Indian corporate sector, the Indian banking sector? Why is everything looking bit shaky? As in, I I'm not sure where things will go, but definitely the corporate sector and the banking sector, they have not been in the best shape in the past few months, especially I think 1 or 2 years. Uh, where do you see this all heading, and whether India is sitting on a serious crisis?
Look, I think, of course, my views are colored both by my experience as a banker at a global level. I ran some businesses, and I was at Lehman Brothers in New York for several years during the height of the kind of credit derivative buildup and crisis. So, what little I've seen, I first started the global level, and I'll come down to India. At the global level, though in theory the economy seemed to be fine and the markets were blazing all guns, in fact it was a false kind of facade, in my opinion. If you look after the global financial crisis, the US and the OECD countries did exactly what they accused Japan of doing after the 1990 Nikkei crash, which is keep on pumping unlimited amounts of liquidity into the system. Though it had been partially unwound, there was still so much excess liquidity that it was propping up the markets. So, in fact, I'd go, in my view, I would say one of the greatest lessons of this crisis is that liquidity management and monetary policy is basically toothless. It is a classic heads I win, tails you lose support system for the markets and the big players in the markets. At least last time it was the banks, where you had some moral kind of backing to say, if the banks crash, mom and pop depositors go down with it. This time the banks are in good shape. Really, It's the private equity players and the big funds and so forth, who, in my opinion, society ought not to be bailing them out, right? I mean, what is the point if there's no risk? You go into a game where you take leverage up on 3x to 5x to 8x, and the minute a crisis comes, the Fed steps in and saves you. So I think the economy was not great globally to start with, though the market said otherwise. And the central banks were already kind of not in a normal situation, and in my opinion, have gotten extremely more kind of what can I say, biased in their actions. But if you come to India, in India, we had a more structural problem. Our markets were the least of our problems. Like in other places, easy money and kind of, both external money, but more, I think, local money, because India's market as a percentage of our national wealth is so small that, it just the secular kind of access to market was driving the market valuations up. But the economy was much worse. And what made the economy worse than the average for the global situation was the demonetization of 2016, followed by the policies of 2017, the GST and the implementation and so forth. Now, the irony of this is when things started becoming clear that the economy was slowing and slowest in, years and years and whatnot have you, the government's response since the last budget till now has been completely, what can I say, mismatched to the problem. The problem we have is first time in 70 years, we have a demand shortage. We are not able to get resources into the hands of the poor, the lower middle class, the middle class. And the government's actions have been all about giving corporate tax cuts, kind of income tax relief, all of these things, which are clearly supply side, right? I mean, even if you're an ardent kind of Reaganite trickle down believer, this is a kind of lag or a built in lag of months, if not a year, between you doing supply side and the FX reaching the demand side. So I would say our economy was really bad. And I've been saying for the last few weeks that unlike the World Bank or IMF or whoever who've cut down or Fitch ratings who have cut down growth forecasts to 1-2%, there is no way that we are not going to have a contraction. This financial year will definitely be mathematically a recession, which we have not seen, at least in my lifetime or in my adult lifetime, in a country where the population is otherwise growing. We have not seen actual recession of negative growth.
No.
But I think this is the first year we're going to see that. So it's really bad.
Thank you. And taking the interview to the relatively sensitive part of the political situation in India, and especially Tamil Nadu and regionalism, regional parties, I have some specific questions on your party and Tamil Nadu, and as well as how do you see the regional parties in the national framework. Now, the DMK has championed certain issues which also got it a good, very strong legitimacy, especially egalitarianism, addressing casteism. And these issues have definitely dominated the Indian electoral politics. Say, if you see the rise of the BSP in North India or the likes. Uh, and they have also entrenched themselves in the regional spheres in different parts of India. But with the rise of BJP, which itself has infused a new sense of nationalism or hyper-nationalism, with a smart combination of certain caste, for instance, they are very particular about which combinations to choose, what type of tickets. But at the same time, we have nationalism as a very strong plinth on which they are basing their politics, and they are communicating to the people. Now, where do you see, does this model of politics and political mobilization, has it eclipsed the fortunes of the regional parties, or the regional parties have found a way out? And especially parties like, say, which are in the north, which are in the east, which are in the south, and including the DMK. How do you see this challenge, and whether there is a response strategy, or do you think the politics in Tamil Nadu is immune to the BJP's idea of reaching out to the people?
Yeah, I mean, never say never, right? I don't assume everything or anything is guaranteed, or everything stays the same. So I think anything is possible, but I would make probably three slightly different points. The first is, it's not about the party, it's about the principle. The principle is local self-governance, self-respect, devolution of powers closer to the people, not using religion or caste as a tool to create a hierarchy or a stratification, and ensuring that opportunity is given to all, particularly starting with educational opportunities, then employment and all that afterwards, but education. So if you look at the history of the Dravidian movement going back to the founding in the 1916, my great granduncle, my great grandfather died young, so my great granduncle was the leader of the family, joint family, was one of the financiers of the party, and he was not atypical. The Justice Party was founded by elite, wealthy, non-Brahmin, upper caste, religious people, right? I mean, my own grandfather was a graduate of your university, of Jesus College, in 1915. So, people who understood that there was no future in trying to keep this elite at the top and leave the masses left behind, who felt that you had to lift the bottom of the pyramid and you had to kind of flatten the pyramid by giving greater opportunity, including brutal things like reservations, including quotas, to make sure that everybody had a piece of the pie. So, in that sense, I would say in Tamil Nadu, our principles are beyond the party. If you look in the last 50 years since 1967, no national party has been able to make inroads. It's been a personality issue between different Dravidian parties, or at least self-professed Dravidian parties. And the value system has always been kind of one of inclusion, self-respect, harmony between religions and castes. I'm not saying they're 100% perfect. I'm not saying we're 100% successful. So I think the idea of the BJP to overcome that is very small. The second point I'll make is that today's BJP is not the same BJP that it was 5 years or 10 years ago. Clearly, there is a Narendra Modi, Amit Shah era of the BJP. That is an extreme version of the BJP also, because the BJP, I make a simple point, which I'd like your view on. If it was not a democratic party, surely two people with no antecedents, most of our parties, many of us are third generation, fourth generation, access ramps and so forth. So if you take a Mr. Modi or Mr. Shah, who had no history in the party, their fathers were not in the party, in the hierarchy, they were not recognizable. For them to have risen to the top must have been a meritocracy. There's no other way you can explain it. So inherently, it must have been a more accessible meritocracy that allowed them to come up. But what we see today is that it is completely a dictatorship. Forget what happens outside. Forget what happens through the prime minister's office or the country. Within the BJP, nobody is allowed to raise their voice or give an input. It is completely dominated by one or two people, sure. And surely, as bad as that is for a democracy, it's also bad for their political party. Once you get all knowing, all seeing kind of people who think that they are invincible, it is the beginning of the end. I've seen that in markets, I've seen that in public life, I've seen that everywhere. And, history is replete with such examples. So I would say that's the second aspect of it, is that we are not only talking about, regular BJP philosophy versus the Dravidian philosophy. We're talking about an extreme case of authoritarianism. This is not really about party A, party B, philosophy A, philosophy B. Really, the fundamental point is, what is the model of governance that suits India? Is it a kind of centralized model with less devolved powers to the states and the panchayats? Or should it be a more federal model, as our constitution states, that India is a union of the states? And pre the 42nd Amendment during emergency done by Mrs. Gandhi, the states were given significant powers. They still have. It's not like the US, where they say if it is not listed, it automatically becomes the state's right. But we have now reached a scale, a complexity, and a diversity. I can give you so many statistics. We are physically the same country, but the demographics, the economics, the health, the social considerations, the birth rates, the education levels, you pick any statistical indicator, any social indicator, any demographic indicator, the best to the worst states are now 3x, 5x, 7x, 2x. So can you have a one size fits all model of governance sitting in Delhi? Was the question before the crisis. The crisis has clearly shown us that the answer is no. You can see the wide range of outcomes and the wide range of approaches people have taken. If you're a net migrant labor donating state, your policy has to be fundamentally different. If you're a net migrant labor receiving state, your policy and your situation is completely different, just to take the most stark difference. So I think really these kind of limitations of centralization, whether it is Delhi versus the states, whether it is two people versus the full cabinet, or whether it is some caste versus all caste, these have been shown to be ineffective in this crisis. That would be the overall point that I take.
Uh, Based on your answer, principles definitely, as you described, they should be fundamental and not the politics of winning elections. But when we see the success of BJP, particularly in the north, and what they're trying to do in the South India, they are trying to make aggressive inroads into especially Kerala and Tamil Nadu. They think that the victory in Karnataka and however they manage the show, that has been something not less than a victory, but mixing principles with some smart strategies where you just charm the people. This is something which has been a tested model, and where the parties can tweak a bit, but at the same time they can have their own inroads. Now, in a state like Tamil Nadu, and I'm very sorry if I'm trying to generalize, but the way I see the way the politics in Tamil Nadu being structured, definitely caste and egalitarianism have been strong reference points, and that's why we see Tamil Nadu having say 70% of the reservation, and which represents the extreme focus on egalitarianism. But at the same time, if I read the Tamil Nadu politics right, there has been an extreme form of reliance on personalities and not party structures, where starting from MGR to Mrs. Jayalalitha to the charm of Mr. Karunanidhi himself. Uh, and now, why I'm recalling this, why I'm saying this is because when we see the BJP's model of reaching out to the people, particularly it has been trying to associate with some popular actors in Tamil Nadu. Now, do you think all these things could definitely relegate the larger issues, but at the same time strike a chord with people? Because the kind of admiration which the way I see in Tamil Nadu, which is there for actors, media personalities, and celebrities, and how this has seeped into the popular politics and electoral politics. Do you think this would definitely be a continuation of a trend which has been there in Tamil Nadu?
I mean, it's a very good question. Let me say a few things. I think if you look at Tamil Nadu politics, starting with the Justice Party, going through, so let's put it in context. Roughly from 1920, the elected governments under the Montagu-Chelmsford reforms and the diarchy bicameral kind of legislature approach. From then till about 1937, it was some form of the Justice Party or its adherents. Then 37 to 67 was some form of the Congress or its adherents. And from 67 till now, it's been the Dravidians again. Clearly, charismatic leaders help. Clearly, prevailing conditions help. One of the biggest recruiting tools for the Justice Party was that there was still the two water pot system in schools. When we said compulsory education and everybody came to school, they still had these holdover practices that there was a separate drinking water pot for Brahmins and a separate one for everybody else. Now, once you did mass enrollment in schools, you found that there were 3% or 5% of the population drinking one water pot and 95 using the other water pot. Clearly, that water pot gets over fast. And so the notion that you can be at school and even though there is water in the other pot, you're not entitled to drink it, is the best recruitment tool that the Dravidian movement could have had. So, circumstances led to it. Now, I say principles and circumstances were more important than charismatic leaders at the beginning of this movement. There was a phase when you're right, it was Mr. Annadurai, then followed by Mr. Karnanidhi, then followed by Mr. MGR, and followed by Ms. Jayalalitha, who incidentally was a Brahmin, but believed in the principles of Dravidianism. So I think, if anything, the fact that the power kept switching, except for the recent election, it was left, right, is that the people valued the principles more than the personalities, right? If they loved one personality, they should have just stuck with them forever. So personalities were important, but the principles were also important. I had actually given an interview after the demise of Ms. Jayalalitha and before the demise of our own leader, Kalangya, where I had said that with the passing of these people, the politics is going to revert to being one of principles rather than personalities, because now we don't, have that. Now, I will still say that if there is one statewide leader in Tamil Nadu who has the charisma to be recognized statewide without being in office, that's certainly my leader. So there's some personality left, but without either, our old president Kalaignar or without Ms. Jayalalitha at the helm, the people of Tamil Nadu gave a resounding vote in the May 2019 general election. We won all but one seat, and the margin of victory was the biggest margin of victory since 1996 in 23 years. So you say if it was only politics or personality, surely Mr. Modi's personal cult is stronger than anybody else's, and yet he was decimated. The BJP's vote share in Tamil Nadu has never crossed the kind of Nota range of 3.5%. So clearly, the principles matter. Now you say, will that is that now is Tamil Nadu going the way of India, or is India going the way of Tamil Nadu? I believe actually India is going the way of Tamil Nadu, because even if you take Karnataka, let's take Karnataka, which is a very interesting state. It's on the cusp of this. Without a Mr. Yediyurappa, without consolidation of the Lingayat vote, without having bought 22 MLAs or whatever for some astronomical sum of money, without putting all of that together, the BJP would have struggled to come to power as it came through the back door this time, after having been out of power for 7 or 8 years. It's not like it's not like on off, on off. They had already lost the previous election. Everybody thought the anti-incumbency was so strong with Mr. Modi sitting in Delhi that for sure it would go to the BJP, but they didn't. So I think in the southern states, the magic of Mr. Modi doesn't work so well, because Mr. Modi himself is a demagogue par excellence. He's a man of unmatched talents. In 2014, he sold us all on this vision of Vikas, of development. By 2019, that model was dead, because whatever was going to otherwise be good or bad, demonetization, GST, and mishandling of the economy had killed the notion of Vikas. All of a sudden, it became about kind of enemies within and enemies without. It became about Chaukidar and Pulwama and Balkot, all of which were failures, incidentally. The Indian response was bad. The intelligence failure led to the people being killed in the terrorist incident, all of which were failures. Years into kind of, what can I say, like, the Pavlovian, and bring out the vote. But there is a market difference. If you plot education level versus BJP vote, or if you plot income level versus BJP vote, and I'm not saying at an individual level, I'm saying at a state level. If you take the states of India and you split them, there are very few exceptions, and those are mostly in West India, where you have both high education, not so much high education. You have high GDP per capita, high spread of wealth. Maharashtra and Gujarat, where the poverty to rich spread is much worse than Tamil Nadu or South India. In those places, Mr. Modi was able to make an impact. But if you look at the rest of the coastal states where we have high education, high GDP, or the ex-communist states, he was not able to make the impact. So I believe actually that the future of India is all about regional parties. Even the BJP at its height today, with the thousands of crores of legal and illegal and quasi-legal electoral bond money, they are only a factor in about 15 states. The rest of the states, they have bought power because they have money and it's on the run. They are not a national party. How many issues are there? They say there's no beef allowed in Uttar Pradesh, and they lynch people for it. But in the Northeast and in Goa, they say, yeah, no problem. One of their ardent supporters, Mr. Pai, his family is in the beef exporting business and is one of the top beef exporters. So, they don't mix business and principle without any kind of batting an eyelid, right? So I think this notion that in a country of 1.3 billion people, you can have a uniform kind of policy and a uniform approach and somehow make that work, meaning the execution skills to make that work. I think it's a kind of fundamentally flawed notion, and it is being covered up by the dramatic demagoguery and personality of a very charismatic man. And that there's a limit to that. Sooner or later, performance has to be out, right? Has to be delivered.
And that brings to my last question, which is on the coming elections in Tamil Nadu in 2021. Now, this present term, we've seen a lot. Mrs. Jayalalitha passed away. Then there was a whole crisis on who should be the next chief minister, and we saw the whole process of it. And now we have DMK, which has I don't know how to put it, but in slightly say harsh way, I can say they lost two elections. And now you have a third contender. Now you say that BJP is probably not as dominant as it is portraying itself to be, especially in the Tamil Nadu. But technically, theoretically, we have three contenders. We have the AIADMK, we have your party, we have the BJP, which are seen as far as the national media is concerned, they could be wrong, but the match is believed to be, or it is assumed to be, a match between three parties. And the DMK, which is looking to revive in the coming elections, does it have any strategy? If it has a strategy, how sure are you that the strategy is enough to strike a chord with the people? Are there any core principles which you are taking out? And as also, how, as you head the IT cell of the DMK party, I'm sure you are in charge of the how the way party is communicating, especially through the social media and all the electronic platforms. Do you think social media can be a powerful driver in the outreach, given the number of people who are now relying on WhatsApp and Facebook, Twitter to communicate their views? How do you think the DMK can challenge the other two parties, and especially the BJP's idea of reaching out to the Tamilians? How do you see this working, and do you think there is a chance for the DMK to revive?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think the question is a bit misworded. Revive compared to what? Revive, we got
Compared to its past
53%.
performance,
Yeah,
its
we got
past
53.
performance in
We got 53% of the vote in May 2019 after losing by less than 1% of the vote in May 2016. So, I am extremely sanguine. Let me put out three or four facts. Whether it's two-pronged, three-pronged, and all that, I don't know. But as of today, you cannot distinguish the BJP from the ADMK. If the BJP was not supporting them, if the governors were not doing anti-constitutional, in my opinion, and courts were not holding on to cases and not adjudicating them, this government would have fallen 2 years or 3 years ago. 11 MLAs who voted against the government are not disqualified by the speaker, and they're still allowed to sit and be ministers. 18 MLAs who didn't even vote against the government were disqualified without ever coming to the House. When is the speaker allowed to disqualify people based on what I think I'm going to do in a press conference? It's idiocy. It's complete anti-democratic. If there has been kind of a theft of government in any place in India, Tamil Nadu is the example. And I say this, I'm saying, with full personal friendship with every person in the ADMK, and I don't cast them morally any worse than me or my party. But the practicality of the situation is it is the thuggery of the Modi government that has allowed them to stay in power this long. Be that as it may, I'm not as worried about the election because I think the people of Tamil Nadu cannot be fooled. Our average education is the highest in India. It's a +2 graduate. 48% of our youth attend college of some sort of college going age, which is 20 points higher than the Indian average, 10, 15 points higher than the second state of Kerala, and 30 points higher than the Hindi belt where Mr. Modi gets most of his votes. We have the highest penetration of internet, including mobile phone penetration, which is the bulk of it. Something like 70% of Tamil Nadu is online. If social media was enough to win the elections and you could override reality with social media, surely the BJP would have won by now. They spend 10x or 100x what all the other parties in India together spend, and they have more technology and more robots and more offshore resources, and you've seen all the analysis of this. So the point is that social media kind of has multiple ways, multiple stages of development, right? So if you look at a place like the UK or the US where people live their lives on social media and actual human contact is reduced, meaning they're not as personally walking around the streets as much as the average Indian, particularly middle class or poor Indian, then by analyzing their personality through Cambridge Analytica type or greater kind of interfaces, APIs into their social lives, and then tailoring the messages to them, you can create outcomes. But in India, you got two, three barriers to that. The first is not enough of our lives are online. Even most of us are not banking online. Most of us are not doing purchasing online. Just because we look at YouTube videos doesn't mean anything. Number one. Number two, even if you could glean something about us, we are not operating in the kind of quasi-social environment that the West is. We are all mingled mass of people constantly meeting each other, living in large families across many generations and facing everyday life. So I say, as the head of the DMK IT wing, I say all the time, the great luxury for Tamil Nadu is, yes, WhatsApp University, as perfected by the BJP, operates at the same scale or more in Tamil Nadu than anywhere else. But in UP or in Bihar, if you have one guy with a WhatsApp phone out of every 10 in a village, it's a big deal. Here, 8 out of 10 guys have it, even in the village. That means even though somebody is spreading one version of the truth, other versions of the truth are being sent all the time. And most people can walk out on the street and say, does this sound right to me that the government is performing fantastically well? Where are the provisions in the ration shop? Why is it not here? So I am very clear about a few things, and record and hold this to me hold me to this a year from now. I'm very clear about two, three things. People are very tactical and very clear voters. In by-elections, I do a lot of post-poll kind of surveys. I'm not as worried about predicting the outcome, though I do some of that. But after the results are declared, I go and do a lot of surveys because I want to understand the psychology of the voter and build for the next time. And people are very, very clear. The by-elections that we lost brutally, I'll go worse than you. Constituencies that we had won with 35,000 votes in the MP election, because they declare the results MLA by MLA. We lost by 35,000 votes in the by-election. So how does it swing 70,000 votes, which is basically about 40% of the vote, has swung, or higher has swung in less than a year? When we go and ask the people, they're very clear. They say, listen, why should I vote for you? At that time, there was a chance that regime change may happen. This time, there's no chance of regime change. This government is going to continue for another 10, 11 months. If I have a ruling party MLA, maybe they'll bring me more kind of benefits and SOPs and so forth. And if I have opposition MLA, who am I proving what to? And basically there were other factors. I don't want to make unnecessary allegations, but you know how the role of money plays, and the ruling parties have money to distribute and so forth. Also, there were some personal factors. For example, in the Kanyakumari constituency, people were upset that somebody they had elected as MLA gave up the seat and went to MP. Said, dude, what am I, your private property that I can vote for you? You'll bugger off and then I have to vote for your replacement. So there was antagonism. In the north, there was much more of a caste factor, and there were some issues there. So my view is the average Tamil voter is a very sophisticated, rational, in their self-interest voter. It is only once in the last 34 years that they have not said, at least let me change that Dravidian party for this Dravidian party. And that we made some bad tactical errors and strategic errors, and we lost by less than 1% of the vote. I have zero doubt in my mind we'll win the next election. I'm worried about what happens after that. But I have zero doubt in my mind of making 3 or 4 predictions. I don't think there's going to be any threat to anybody of any actor entering. The people are smart enough. You can't categorize MGR as an actor alone. MGR was instrumental in building up the ideology of the Dravidian movement and of propagating it for a decade before he ever entered electoral politics. So, and Ms. Jayalalitha was a talent second to none. Intellectually, she was a giant, so the fact that she was an actor was the least of her skills. I don't think any actor today who's on the verge of entering politics or has already entered politics is in their league. In fact, I'll ask a different question to be very brutal again. How are they not able to make money on their films? If they're such great giants of society, when was the last time they had huge hits and paid everybody properly? All their movies have been flops, and they're not able to get the distributors and theater owners paid. Now the guy's going to come to electoral politics and change the world. It's not going to happen. So I'll make a few predictions that you'll hold me to. I don't think these guys enter, and if they enter, I don't think they make a difference. I think we win, and I think we win big because the economy and the situation is going to get much worse than it is now. And people are not fools to let kind of quasi backdoor people continue for a next term. What I am worried about is not any of that. I am seriously worried about the economic consequences of this crisis, which are going to be worse than anything we have ever seen. To the point that I worry whether we'll have things like social unrest, because we are still a growing economy in terms of people, in terms of youth entering the job market. If we now have an economic decline at a time when there are more people to feed and more people looking for employment, what does that lead to? That is really the worry that I have. I don't really think we're playing traditional politics anymore. In fact, anybody who thinks they're playing the politics of the day before the crisis is yesterday's man. We are not in the same league anymore, at least as far as Tamil Nadu is concerned. Maybe, India average is hard for me to say. I don't have the experience. But in Tamil Nadu, we are in a different era. This is a different era, and people understand where kind of who stands and where the competence is and where the heart is. Above all else in politics, you must have the compassion, you must have the desire to improve people's lives and the ability to feel bad if you don't. And I think that skill or that talent, the people are clearly seeing who has how much of that. And so I'm very sanguine about the election and its outcome.
So thank you very much for all your elaborate responses, and we definitely hope uh, India emerges safely from the present crisis which is unfolding, and we are definitely looking forward to the coming elections, and we wish your party all the best. Thank you very much for being with us and giving all the answers, dissecting all the questions bit by bit. Thank you very much. Thank you, sir.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you.
Thanks.